SAGA Egmont presents Secrets of the Mist by Kate Ryder. Read by Aoife Mcmahon. Chapter 1. As I looked towards the huddle of cottages nestling on the far side of the village green, I noticed how still it had become, like an expectant, held breath. And somewhere deep within my soul, I felt tendrils of distant memory reach out to me. The sun was warm on that early summer's evening, and yet I shivered. A thick haze hung in the air, and the sounds of the pub seemed muffled, as if the world was somehow suppressed, waiting for something to happen. What? I did not know, but my senses were on high alert. Something was coming. Suddenly, from out of nowhere, I detected the slightest breeze, and a wisp of air languidly encircled my body, as if investigating me. I looked towards Dan to see if he had noticed anything, but he seemed distant from me, as if I was cushioned and remote from the world. I didn't feel threatened. In fact, I revelled in the sensation of that warm, tender kiss of air as it gently caressed me. As if in some way being guided, I watched the shadows fall across the mellow-coloured cottage on the far side of the village green, and shivered again. Earlier that afternoon, when one of the film crew suggested a drink after work at a local pub he'd discovered, I was only too pleased to be invited. We had endured a hard day's filming, one that had proved particularly trying for me, having to deal with a star whose ego was extremely large. And I had already used up most of my diplomacy and patience during the previous 3 weeks' filming. A bit of good old R&R was in order. They were a great crowd at Hawkstone Media, and I had happily worked there for the past 8 years, since first arriving in the UK as a fresh-faced, enthusiastic girl from Dublin, full of raw ambition. Ken Hawkstone, the man behind the company, was a demanding but fair whirlwind of creative force, and he recognised that ambition, offering me numerous breaks along the way. I had worked my way up from continuity girl to assistant director and loved the work, even though it was all-consuming and left little time for anything else. However, over the past couple of years, I'd found sleep increasingly fitful and was often awake in the small hours, battling strange, disconcertingly deep thoughts about the random nature of choice, fate, and destiny. Thoughts that made no sense at all in the cold light of day. And although I could never recall the details on waking, I was visited by a recurring dream, one that left a lingering memory of a pair of tender blue-grey eyes, and a feeling of a hand having touched my heart. As the years slipped by, however hard I tried to ignore it, I was aware of an underlying, nagging insistence for change. The sounds of a busy pub enveloped me as we entered the Blacksmith's Arms, a charming 17th-century country inn with flagstone floors and heavily beamed ceilings. It was obviously a popular haunt. Clusters of people sat in private alcoves enjoying an early evening drink, and through an open archway I saw tables being set for dinner. We booked a table for 8 o'clock, and then, having ordered drinks, walked outside into that early summer's evening towards the first moment of my future. I looked across the village green, beyond the massive oak tree standing proudly at its centre, towards the stone cottage, and saw a red and yellow for sale board erected in its garden. Again, I detected the slightest breeze, and as I watched the shadows from the oak fall across the cottage, I shivered involuntarily. "Cold, Mads?" asked Dan, one of the camera crew and my occasional lover. He was a kindly soul. "Not really. I've just got this feeling I've been here before. Kind of spooky in a comforting sort of way, if you know what I mean." I finished lamely.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?